3 nights the house had not slept. 3 nights the gas lamps had burned in every corridor of Ashcroft Hall, and the servants had moved through those corridors like mourners at a wake that would not end. The sound came from the east wing, from the room at the top of the stairs where the curtains had been drawn since Monday, and it was not screaming exactly. It was worse than screaming. It was the low, ragged keening of someone who had forgotten how to stop. Thomas, the heir to Ashcroft Hall, was 26 years old and had been in Lord Ashcroft's care for 11 years. He had been found in a workhouse in Whitechapel, half-starved and burning with a fever that should have killed him. It had not killed him. Lord Ashcroft had brought him home. The boy had grown into a quiet, steady young man who kept the estate's accounts and walked the grounds each morning before anyone else was awake. He was not given to illness. He was not given to distress. And yet, for 3 nights now, he had lain in his bed with his hands pressed over his ears and his eyes wide open. Nothing anyone did could reach him. The physician from the village had come on the first night, listened to Thomas's chest, examined his eyes, and prescribed laudanum. Thomas had not swallowed it. The liquid sat untouched on the bedside table, growing a film of dust. The physician from Bath arrived on the second night with a colleague who specialized in disorders of the mind. They had spoken to Thomas in low, careful voices. They had tried cool compresses and warm broth, and the reading aloud of familiar passages. Thomas had turned his face to the wall, and the keening had grown louder, vibrating through the plaster until the paintings in the hallway trembled on their hooks. By the third night, Lord Ashcroft had dismissed them all. He sat in the chair beside Thomas's bed, with his coat removed and his sleeves rolled to the elbow. The firelight caught the hard planes of his face in a way that made the remaining servants look away. He was not a man who showed fear. He was showing it now. "Sir," said Hatch, the butler from the doorway. He had served Lord Ashcroft for 23 years and had learned to read the quality of silence in a room the way a sailor reads weather. The silence around Lord Ashcroft was dangerous. "Sir, there is no one left to send for." "There is always someone left," Lord Ashcroft said without turning. "The apothecary has been. The clergyman has been. Mrs. Calloway sat with him for 4 hours yesterday and could not quiet him even with, 'Then find someone who can.'" Hatch stood in the doorway and said nothing for a long moment. Then, in the tone of a man who knows he is about to say the wrong thing, but has exhausted all the right ones, "There was someone, sir, before. Someone who could always settle him when he had his dark spells." Lord Ashcroft's hands went still on the arm of the chair. The fire cracked. Thomas made a sound like a door hinge rusted shut. "No," Lord Ashcroft said. "She was the only one who—" "I said no. She was dismissed. For cause." Hatch looked at the young man in the bed. He looked at the lord in the chair. He had not become butler of this house by arguing with his employer, but he had kept this house standing by, knowing when his employer was wrong. "The cause," Hatch said carefully, "was Mrs. Dalton's word against hers, and Mrs. Dalton has since proven herself unreliable in other matters." He paused. "Sir, the boy has not eaten in 2 days." Lord Ashcroft closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had shifted behind them. Not softness exactly, but the particular exhaustion of a man who has held a position for too long and feels the ground giving way. "Where is she?" he said. It was not a question. "Lodging house on Campden Street. I made inquiries this morning." "You presumed?" "I prepared, sir. There is a difference." Lord Ashcroft looked at Hatch for a long time. Then he looked at Thomas, whose fingers were curled into the sheets so tightly the fabric had torn, and the sound coming from him was quieter now, but somehow worse for being quiet. thin and continuous, like a wire pulled taut enough to sing. "Bring her," Lord Ashcroft said. The carriage left Ashcroft Hall at 11:30, on a night so cold the horse's breath froze into small clouds, like torn cotton. It returned 40 minutes later. The woman who stepped out of it wore a gray dress that had been mended at the wrists and a coat that was not warm enough for November. She stood in the gravel drive and looked up at the house she had been cast out of 6 weeks ago, and her face showed nothing at all. That blankness was more telling than tears would have been. Her name was Eleanor Voss. She was 28 years old. She had been a housemaid at Ashcroft Hall for 2 years, and before that she had been a housemaid in 3 other houses, and before that she had been nothing in particular. An orphan grown up, a woman who worked and kept her own counsel, and sang under her breath while she polished silver because the sound steadied her hands. Hatch met her at the door. The hallway smelled of beeswax and the particular staleness of a house where windows have not been opened. She noticed. She noticed everything. It was the quality that had made her good at service, and the quality that had, in the end, gotten her dismissed. "Mrs. Dalton told Lord Ashcroft I stole a brooch," Eleanor said, before Hatch could speak. She was tapping her thumb against her first finger, a small, rhythmic motion, like someone keeping time to music only she could hear. He believed her. "Why am I here?" "Because Thomas needs you," Hatch said, "and because I never believed her." Eleanor looked at him. Something moved behind her composure. Not gratitude, not quite. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition of being seen by at least one person in a house that had looked through her. "Take me to him," she said. They climbed the stairs. The keening grew louder with each step, and Eleanor's tapping quickened against her skirt. Outside the door to Thomas's room, she stopped. Lord Ashcroft was standing in the corridor now, his back against the wall and his arms crossed, and when he saw her, his expression did something complicated. A flinch folded into formality. "Miss Voss," he said. "My lord." They regarded each other across 6 feet of carpet and 6 weeks of injustice. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had made him smaller in her mind to make the memory bearable. His face was all angles, a face that could have been carved from pale stone, and his eyes were dark and very old. She had always thought his eyes were older than the rest of him. She had never let herself wonder why. "I was wrong to dismiss you without hearing your account," he said. The words came out stiffly, as though they had been stored in a place he did not often visit. "Hatch has since informed me that the brooch was found among Mrs. Dalton's own possessions." Eleanor's thumb beat against her finger. Tap, tap, tap. "And Mrs. Dalton?" "Remains in her position as housekeeper. For now." "For now," Eleanor repeated, and her voice was level in a way that cost her something. "My lord, I did not come back for an apology. I came back for Thomas." She opened the door and went in. The room smelled of camphor and sweat and something sharper underneath. Something metallic that Eleanor could not name. Thomas lay on the bed with his knees drawn up and his face turned away. The sound he was making filled the room like water fills a basin, rising to every corner. The candles on the mantelpiece guttered as though something in the air was pulling at them. Eleanor crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She did not touch him. She did not speak. She sat and she breathed, and she let the rhythm of her breathing find the rhythm of his distress. And then, slowly, the way dawn comes in winter, so gradually that you cannot say exactly when the dark becomes less dark, she began to sing. It was not a hymn. It was not a lullaby. It was an old song, older than the house, older perhaps than the name of the county it came from. A song about a river that ran through a valley where no one lived anymore, and the woman who walked beside it remembering someone she had loved. The melody was simple. 3 notes up, 2 notes down, a pause like a held breath, and then again. Eleanor's voice was not remarkable by any standard a music master would recognize. It was low and warm and slightly rough at the edges. The voice of someone who has spent years singing quietly in empty rooms and has never learned to perform, but has learned instead to mean it. The candles steadied. The metallic sharpness in the air thinned and faded, replaced by something that smelled like rain on warm stone. Thomas's hands, which had been clenched so tightly the tendons stood out like cords, began to loosen. His breathing, which had been shallow and ragged, found the rhythm of the song and followed it the way a lost traveler follows a light. Lord Ashcroft stood in the doorway and watched. He had not moved. He had not breathed. Though he could go much longer than a mortal man without breathing and often did when something required his complete attention. The sound of her voice did something to the room that he could feel in the way he felt changes in temperature or pressure. Not with his skin, but with something older, something that lived in the part of him that was not human, and had not been human for a very long time. The air around her was warm. The air around him was always cold. And between them, in the space where her voice traveled, something was happening that he did not have a word for in any of the 7 languages he spoke. Thomas's keening stopped. Not abruptly. It faded, the way a river loses itself in sand, growing quieter and quieter, until Eleanor's voice was the only sound in the room. She sang the verse about the valley again, and Thomas turned his face toward her, and his eyes focused for the first time in 3 days. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was hoarse and very young. "I'm here," she said, and she kept singing, lower now, almost humming, her hand resting on the blanket near his but not touching it, letting him choose. Thomas closed his eyes. His breathing deepened. Within minutes, he was asleep, truly asleep, not the rigid unconsciousness of exhaustion, but the soft, even breathing of someone who has been given permission to rest. Eleanor sat with him for a long time after that, humming the melody down to a thread, and when she finally stopped and looked up, Lord Ashcroft was still in the doorway. His expression was one she had never seen on any face in any house she had ever worked in. It was the expression of a man who has just understood something that will cost him everything he has built to protect himself. He said nothing. She said nothing. The fire settled in the grate. Hatch appeared behind Lord Ashcroft with a candle and the particular expression of a man who has been right and is choosing graciously not to mention it. "I have prepared a room for Miss Voss," Hatch said, "the one on the 2nd floor with the south-facing window. Unless my lord objects." "I do not object," Lord Ashcroft said, and his voice had a quality Eleanor had not heard before. Not the authority of a master speaking to a servant, but the careful neutrality of a man speaking around something he is not ready to name. Eleanor rose from the bed. "I will need to check on him in the night," she said. "Whatever you require," Lord Ashcroft said. And then, as though the words were being pulled from him by something stronger than propriety, "Why does it work? Your voice. Why does it reach him when nothing else can?" Eleanor looked at Thomas's sleeping face. Her thumb tapped once against her finger and stopped. "I don't know," she said. "It always has." She left the room and Lord Ashcroft stood in the doorway for a long time after, listening to the sound of a young man breathing easily for the first time in 3 days. The distant sound of footsteps on the stairs. and beneath both of those, like a river running underground, the echo of a melody he would not be able to forget. Mrs. Dalton appeared at breakfast. She was a tall woman with iron-colored hair, and the particular bearing of someone who had once been beautiful and had decided, when that currency devalued, to invest instead in authority. She set the morning's menus before Hatch with the efficiency of a field marshal, and did not mention Eleanor's return. Meant she already knew and had already decided what to do about it. Eleanor found this out at 9:30. When she came downstairs to bring Thomas broth, and found her path blocked by Mrs. Dalton in the corridor outside the kitchen. "I understand you were brought back as a temporary measure," Mrs. Dalton said. Her voice was pleasant in the way that polished floors are pleasant, smooth and hard, and designed to make you feel that any fall was your own fault. "For the young master's sake, I want you to know I bear you no ill will." Eleanor looked at her. She tapped her thumb against her finger once. "The brooch was found in your room, Mrs. Dalton. A misunderstanding. I was holding it for safekeeping." Mrs. Dalton smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "I do hope we can work together cordially, for however long you remain." "However long I remain," Eleanor repeated. "These things are always temporary, aren't they? Lord Ashcroft has a particular standard for his household. He always returns to it." She adjusted the keys at her belt, a small gesture, a deliberate one. The keys were the symbol of her authority, and she wore them the way a soldier wears medals. "I have managed this house for 9 years. 9 years, Miss Voss. You were here for 2. She moved aside. Eleanor passed. The broth was hot in her hands, and her heart was beating fast. But she kept her pace steady and her face still, and she did not look back. Over the following days, Eleanor settled into a strange position in the household. Not quite servant, not quite anything else. She tended to Thomas, who was improving but slowly, as though whatever had seized him had left a mark that faded rather than disappeared. She sang to him each evening, and each evening the room grew warm and still in a way that could not be explained by the fire alone. And each evening Lord Ashcroft found a reason to be nearby, reviewing correspondence in the hallway, consulting with Hatch on some domestic matter that could easily have waited. He watched her the way a man watches the sun after a long winter, not directly, but with an awareness that saturated everything else he did. Eleanor noticed. She noticed that he remembered she took her tea without sugar, though she had never told him. She noticed that a warmer coat appeared in her room, her exact size, with no note attached. She noticed that, when they passed in the corridor, he slowed his step to match hers. The cold air that always surrounded him thinned at its edges, as though his body was trying to be less of what it was. "He stares at you," Hatch said on the 4th day, appearing beside her in the linen closet with a candlestick that needed polishing and an expression of studied innocence. "When you are not looking, which is frequently." "Hatch, I am merely reporting observable phenomena. I am a butler. Observation is my profession." He set the candlestick down. "He has not stared at anyone in the 11 years I have known the current state of his household. He does not stare at the way normal men stare either. He goes very still. It is noticeable. He is my employer. He was your employer. Then he dismissed you on false pretenses. Now you are something else and neither of you knows what." Hatch picked up the candlestick again, examined it, set it down once more. "I have managed many things in this house. I do not intend to manage this. I am simply telling you that the coat was his idea, and he spent 20 minutes selecting it." Eleanor pressed her lips together, but something loosened behind her ribs. 20 minutes. For a man who makes most decisions in under 3 seconds, That is practically an opera. He left. Eleanor stood in the linen closet surrounded by the smell of lavender and clean cotton and allowed herself, for exactly 5 seconds, to feel the full weight of what was happening to her. Then she folded it away and went back to work. The second escalation came on a Thursday. Eleanor went to the village to collect thread for mending. When she returned, Hatch met her in the entrance hall with the careful blankness that meant something had gone wrong. "Mrs. Dalton has written to your previous employers," he said. "All 3. She has told them you were dismissed from Ashcroft Hall for theft and suggested they might wish to reconsider any references they had provided." Eleanor set down her parcel. She set it down slowly, precisely, the way a person handles something fragile when their hands want to shake. Her thumb beat against her finger. Tap, tap, tap. "If those references are withdrawn," she said, "I cannot work in service again, in any house." "I know," Hatch said. "She is destroying my livelihood to make me leave." "I know that too." He paused. "I have the letters. She asked the footman to post them, and the footman brought them to me. I have not sent them." Eleanor looked at him. "Why?" "Because I have worked in houses long enough to know the difference between a woman protecting her position and a woman protecting herself from being found out." He lowered his voice. "Miss Voss, Mrs. Dalton's accounts for the household have not balanced since before you arrived. I noticed. I said nothing because it was not yet enough to prove. But she has been skimming from the household budget, small amounts, consistently, for years. Does Lord Ashcroft know? Lord Ashcroft trusts her. He has trusted her for 9 years. Trust, once established with him, is not easily questioned. He is a man who decides and then stands by his decisions." Hatch's expression was delicate. "It is both his finest quality and his most inconvenient one." Eleanor took the letters. She put them in her pocket. She did not burn them and she did not throw them away. Evidence, she had learned, was only useful when the moment was right. She turned then and looked at him, and the candlelight caught his face, and she saw, for the first time clearly, that his skin had no color at all. It was not pale the way fair people are pale. It was pale the way marble is pale, the way moonlight is pale, a pallor that went deeper than complexion into something fundamental about what he was. And his eyes, which she had always thought were simply dark, were dark the way deep water is dark, not an absence of light, but a presence of depth. "You are not cold because the house is cold," she said. Her voice was steady. Her thumb tapped twice against her finger and stopped. "The house is cold because of you." Lord Ashcroft said nothing for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was the quietest she had ever heard it. "Yes." "How long?" "Longer than this house has stood. Longer than the village. Longer than the name." Eleanor looked at his hands, which were gripping the doorframe with a care that suggested he was being very precise about how much pressure to apply. The wood was not creaking, but she understood that it could. "Thomas," she said, "you did not father him." "No, I found him. I could not save him entirely. The fever had done its damage, left something in him that surfaces in these episodes, something I do not understand and cannot reach." He looked at the sleeping young man. "You reach it. I have spent 11 years trying to understand what happens to him during these spells. You walked in and sang 3 verses of a folk song, and he was at peace. Does it frighten you?" she said. "What I can do?" "Everything about you frightens me, Miss Voss, but not for the reason you are imagining." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was safe. Then she looked away, and the blue faded from the candle tips, and the room was just a room again. Mrs. Dalton's third move came without warning, as the most effective ones always do. Eleanor descended for breakfast to find a stranger in the morning room, a man from the Registry of Domestic Service in Bath, who had received a formal complaint that a woman previously dismissed for theft was residing at Ashcroft Hall and being permitted contact with the household's valuables and its vulnerable heir. The complaint bore the seal of the household. Mrs. Dalton had used her authority as housekeeper to file it under the estate's name, making it appear as though the accusation came from Lord Ashcroft himself. "I am here to conduct a review," the man from the registry said. He was small and precise and smelled of ink. "If the complaint is substantiated, Miss Voss, you will be placed on the registry's exclusion list. No reputable house in England will employ you." Eleanor stood in the morning room with the winter light pressing through the windows and felt the walls of her future narrowing. She could hear Mrs. Dalton in the corridor outside, speaking to one of the maids in a low, satisfied murmur. Her thumb beat against her finger like a pulse. She did not panic. She thought. "I understand," Eleanor said to the man from the registry. "Might I ask that Lord Ashcroft be present for the review? As it was filed in his name, he should be aware of its contents." The man agreed. This was the point at which Mrs. Dalton's plan, which depended entirely on Lord Ashcroft never seeing the complaint, began to fail. Lord Ashcroft arrived in the morning room with the particular stillness that Eleanor now recognized as controlled fury. He read the complaint. He looked at the registry seal. He looked at the signature, the housekeeper's signature, using authority he had never granted for this purpose. "I did not file this," he said. His voice was flat and cold, and the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. The man from the registry shivered, and did not know why. "My lord, the complaint bears your household's. I am aware of what it bears. It bears a forgery." He set the paper down on the table, and the paper did not move, though there was no weight on it, as though the air itself was holding it still. "Send for Mrs. Dalton." Eleanor stepped forward. "My lord, if I may." He looked at her. She saw the impulse in him, the centuries-old reflex to command, to solve, to make the problem disappear with the weight of his authority. She saw him recognize that impulse and, with visible effort, set it down. "Go on," he said. "Mrs. Dalton accused me of stealing a brooch. The brooch was later found among her own things. She has since written to my previous employers, attempting to destroy my references." Eleanor took the unsent letters from her pocket and placed them on the table beside the complaint. "And she has now filed a fraudulent complaint with the registry in your name. These are not separate incidents. They are a pattern." She paused. Her thumb tapped once and stopped. "Hatch has the household accounts for the past 3 years. I believe they will show discrepancies that explain why Mrs. Dalton needs me gone. I noticed things when I worked here. Small things. Invoices that did not match deliveries. Amounts that shifted between ledger entries. I think she knew I noticed. I think that is why she planted the brooch." The man from the registry looked at the letters. He looked at the complaint. He looked at Lord Ashcroft, whose expression could have frozen the Thames. "I will need to see those accounts," the man said. "Hatch," Lord Ashcroft said, without raising his voice. He did not need to. Hatch appeared in the doorway within moments, carrying 3 leather-bound ledgers and wearing the expression of a man who had been carrying these ledgers for some time, waiting for exactly this. Mrs. Dalton arrived in the morning room 4 minutes later, summoned by a footman. She entered with her usual composure, her keys at her belt, her hair impeccable. She saw the letters on the table. She saw the ledgers. She saw Eleanor standing beside Lord Ashcroft, not behind him, and something in her face changed. The controlled pleasantness cracking like ice on a pond, revealing the dark water underneath. "My lord," she began. "Mrs. Dalton," Lord Ashcroft said. "You will be silent." She was silent. The room was silent. The man from the registry was already turning pages in the first ledger, his ink-stained finger tracing columns of figures that did not add up. "The discrepancies are consistent," Eleanor said, speaking to the registry man but looking at Mrs. Dalton. "Small amounts, taken regularly, disguised through altered invoices. She accused me of theft because I was getting close to seeing the truth. She banished me from this house to protect herself." Mrs. Dalton's composure broke then, not into anger, but into something colder. "You are a maid," she said. "A maid who sings to a sick boy and thinks that makes her important. You are nothing. You are no one." "She is the person who kept her head," Lord Ashcroft said, "while you lost yours. And she is the person who brought me evidence while you brought me lies." He turned to Hatch. "Mrs. Dalton will leave the premises today. See to it." The keys came off the belt with a sound like a chain breaking. Mrs. Dalton set them on the table beside the letters and the ledgers and the fraudulent complaint. The collection of objects told a story so clear that even the man from the registry, who was not a man given to narrative, could read it. Eleanor watched her go. Her hands were shaking, but her voice when she spoke was even. "I would like to stay," she said. She was speaking to Lord Ashcroft, but she was also speaking to herself, to the part of her that had spent 6 weeks in a cold lodging house on Campden Street, telling herself that she did not need this place, did not need to belong anywhere, could survive alone as she always had. Not as a maid, not as a temporary measure. "I would like to stay and care for Thomas, and I would like to understand why my voice does what it does, and I would like—" She stopped. The sentence had more in it than she was ready to say. "Yes," Lord Ashcroft said. He said it quickly, as though he had been waiting for her to ask, and was afraid she would change her mind. Then, more quietly, "Yes, please stay." Hatch picked up the candlestick he had been polishing, regarded it with satisfaction, and left the room. The weeks that followed were the strangest and gentlest of Eleanor's life. Thomas improved steadily, and his episodes grew less frequent. And when they came, Eleanor sang and the darkness receded. She began to notice that her voice had effects beyond Thomas, that when she hummed in the kitchen, the bread rose faster, and when she sang in the garden, the frost pulled back from the roses as though embarrassed. She did not understand it. Lord Ashcroft did not understand it either, though he had centuries of experience with things that defied understanding. "I have known witches," he told her one evening, as they walked the grounds in the thin winter sunlight that he tolerated but did not enjoy, "and mystics, and healers, and women who could read the future in a cup of tea. You are none of those things. What you do is different. It is not power. It is—" He searched for the word. This man who spoke 7 languages. "Presence. You make things more of what they are. The room is warmer because you are in it. Thomas is calmer because you are near. I am—" He stopped walking. "You are what?" Eleanor said. He turned to face her. The winter light was behind him and his face was in shadow, and he was, in that moment, the most ancient thing she had ever stood beside. Older than the oaks at the edge of the estate, older than the stone walls that bordered the fields, old enough that the concept of patience had been worn smooth in him, like a river stone. And yet, when he looked at her, his eyes were not old at all. They were uncertain. They were afraid. "I am less alone," he said, "for the first time in more years than you would believe. And I am terrified of it, because you are mortal, and I am not. And every moment I spend near you is a moment I am choosing grief." Eleanor's thumb tapped once against her finger. "Say it," she said. "The word you have been walking around for weeks. The cold skin, the not breathing, the candles that burn too long. Say it, because I will not build something real on a foundation of things left unnamed." He looked at her. "Vampire," he said. The word came out like something he had carried alone for centuries and was finally setting down. "Yes," she said. "I thought so. Since the first night, when you stood in that doorway and did not breathe for 40 minutes. Her thumb stilled. "It does not change what I said. Choose the grief. I am worth it." Eleanor looked at him. She looked at his hands, which were clenched at his sides, and his mouth, which was set in a line. His eyes, which were asking her something he did not know how to say. Her thumb tapped against her finger, once, twice, and then it stopped. Because what she felt in that moment was not anxiety but certainty, the deep and quiet certainty of someone who has finally found the place where her voice sounds the way it was always meant to sound. "Then choose it," she said. He kissed her in the garden, in the cold, with the frost retreating from the ground around them, as though her warmth was enough to change the season. It was a single kiss, careful and desperate in equal measure. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright, with something that might have been tears if his body still produced them. "I will not outlive you," he said. "I refuse." "That," Eleanor said, "is a problem for later." He almost smiled. It transformed his face, not into youth but into something better, into the face of a man who has remembered that joy exists and is available to him. Eleanor looked at that face and thought, "I did that. I can do that again." They walked back to the house together, his cold hand in her warm one. The first snowdrops of early spring were already pushing through the frozen ground where they had stood. By March, Eleanor had stopped being Miss Voss to anyone in the household except the footmen, who were young enough to be formal, had become simply Eleanor, a fixture of Ashcroft Hall as essential as the roof. Thomas called her by name and sought her company daily, and on the evenings when his spells came, less often now, a tremor rather than an earthquake, she sang to him, and the house settled around her voice like a cat settling around fire. Lord Ashcroft, Edmund, she had learned, though she used the name only when they were alone, watched her with Thomas and felt something he had not felt since the century he was turned. The sense that the future contained something worth reaching for. One evening in late March, Eleanor sat by the fire in the drawing room with Thomas dozing in the chair opposite and Edmund reading beside her. Not touching her, but close enough that the boundary between his cold air and her warm air had softened to nothing. Hatch entered with the post and a pot of tea, and the particular expression that meant he had opinions he was choosing to express through eyebrow alone. "The registry has formally withdrawn the complaint," he said, setting the letter on the table. "And Mrs. Dalton has taken a position in a house in Shropshire. I'm told they count the silver nightly." Eleanor laughed. It was a real laugh, unexpected and bright. Edmund looked at her when she made that sound the way a man looks at the first break in clouds after a storm. "I believe," Hatch said, adjusting the tea service with unnecessary precision, "that the house has not run this well since I've been in service. The accounts balance, the bread rises, the young master sleeps." He straightened. "I attribute this to excellent butlering. Naturally, Edmund said. And perhaps, Hatch continued, pausing at the door, to the fact that someone in this house finally had the sense to stop making decisions alone and start listening to a woman who knows what she is about. He left before either of them could respond, which was, Eleanor reflected, excellent butlering indeed. Thomas stirred in his chair. Eleanor, he said, without opening his eyes, I'm here. Would you sing the one about the river? She looked at Edmund. He looked at her. Outside, the March wind pressed against the windows of Ashcroft Hall, and inside, the fire burned steady, and Eleanor Voss began to sing. The old song, the river song, 3 notes up and 2 notes down, and a pause like a held breath, and the house leaned in around her voice the way it always did, and the candle flames burned blue at their tips, and the man beside her who had lived for centuries closed his eyes and listened. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the cold inside him was quiet. No one ever fully explained why her voice did what it did. Eleanor did not try. Some things, she had learned, were not problems to be solved, but gifts to be used, carried forward through the days like a melody that has no ending. Only the promise that the next note will come when it is needed. In a house where the cold and the warm had finally learned to share the same room,